Hey everyone, thanks for joining our risk mitigation strategies for 2020 webinar. We'll get started in a few minutes here, just letting people trickle in. And yeah, we'll get started in the next couple of minutes. All right, we'll go ahead and get started this morning. So thanks again for joining the Risk Mitigation Strategies for 2020 webinar presented by Pipe, Hollow Builder, and Rhumbix. My name is Kayla Rockwell, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Rhumbix, and I'll be your moderator today. As a reminder, all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please ask them in the question box of your GoToWebinar module. We will do our best to answer all questions at the end of this presentation. Should we run out of time to answer your question, we'll reach out to you individually. And we will be sending the slides and a copy of the recorded presentation afterwards. So if for any reason you have to jump off or something comes up, we will send that to you afterwards. So expect that in the next day or two. We'll get you the slides and the presentation. So we've got a great webinar for you today. So without further ado, we will jump right in. So today's panel, we've got Andrew Cameron from Hensel Phelps, Christian Klaus from Hollow Builder, Satyam Verma from Pipe, and Guy Skellett from Rhumbix. And we'll give you just a little introduction of each of them. So I've worked pretty closely with Andrew over the last 2 years. He's a talented and agile project manager from Hensel Phelps. His current project is the SFO Harvey Milk Terminal 1, which if you've flown in and out of SFO recently or seen it, it's an incredible project. And Andrew, I'll let you say a few things about yourself.
Sure, thank you, Kayla. Real quick, been with Hensel Phelps for just over 10 years. Had the pleasure of starting with the company and the team back in the Mid-Atlantic district, so working on a few federal and hospitality projects in and around the Beltway. And have been out here on the West Coast helping our aviation team here at SFO with T3 East and Terminal 1 for the past 4 years.
Awesome, thanks Andrew. Next up is Christian Klaus from Hollow Builder. Hollow Builder's got some really cool videos coming up in the webinar to showcase some of the work Hollow Builder is doing around risk. But Christian, I'll let you say a few things about yourself.
Awesome, thank you, Kayla. My name is Christian, CMO and Head of Partnerships over here at HoloBuilder. I've been with HoloBuilder for the last 4 years. Before moving into marketing and partnerships, I was building product with our engineering team over here at HoloBuilder. Today, I work closely with our customers and partners to enable workflows across platforms. We believe that products should be interconnected with the rest of the ecosystem. Much like construction, the technology landscape is a team sport, and we kind of work towards integrating with the rest of the industry. This webinar is a wonderful example of this. 3 construction tech startups and the very innovative GC to kind of put their knowledge together and share it across. So I'm very much looking forward to this.
Thanks, Christian. Next up, Satyam Verma from Pipe. Pipe is really changing the way pre-con and closeout happens for construction companies everywhere. And Satyam is working to make sure the construction tech ecosystem is more connected than ever. Satyam?
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. Yeah, my name is Satyam. I've been with Pipe for just about 3 years now. And then as Christian has mentioned, and as kind of the topic of what we've been really working together is ensuring that client feedback, market feedback is really coming together to provide a more unified workflow. There's a lot of conversation about data silos and how to ensure that the data that we are now collecting through technology is actually having an impact on the daily workflows that we see. And that's really where I put my hat on every day and come to work with our wonderful clients and bring a more unified product experience together.
Thanks, Satyam. And finally, we've got Guy Skillett. I call him the man, the myth, and the legend. If there's anything Guy's passionate about, it's uncovering construction workflow bottlenecks and helping customers adopt and embrace technology to work smarter. Guy has a wealth of construction knowledge, but honestly, it's probably better when it comes from him. Guy?
Yeah, I don't quite know how to follow that, but yeah, my name is Guy. I really try and work with some of our larger customers in the both GC and especially subcontractor space. Spent 10 years bouncing around the world with Bechtel building big things. Where there was always an awful lot of risk and it was always buried. So a real focus on trying to tease out areas of risk and help construction companies manage that through data. A real focus of what I'll be talking about in this presentation.
Thanks, Guy. Oh, here. Next up, so we will kick things off with level setting. So we're all kind of on the same page about how we're talking about risk mitigation for the purpose of this webinar. We'll be defining risk mitigation as the following. Risk management is the identification, evaluation, and prioritization of risk followed by coordinated and economical application of resources to minimize, monitor, and control the probability or impact of unfortunate events or to maximize the realization of opportunities. And in practice, this really involves kind of 4 main components of risk mitigation. Identifying threats, determining the risk, determining ways to reduce those risks, and prioritizing risk reduction measures. Now, that really comes up into kind of a few main areas within construction. So we've got labor risk, supply chain, project complexity, financial and schedule, societal and governance, and climate. And, first kind of question really to you, Guy, is in your experience, which of these areas of risk have been the hardest to manage and why?
Yeah, so I did a bit of research over the last couple of days and looking at some industry publications about risk areas that have been highlighted in the 21st century. And really the major ones that are the most challenging to manage are the ones that are outside of the control of the immediate stakeholders. So if you look at labor risk, you have real issues in the construction industry with an aging craft workforce population. Construction companies are trying to retain and hire talent, with the competition of technology companies that are looking to try and build themselves. If you look at the big data center builds, that's a huge challenge. And then obviously things like robotics represent a huge opportunity to potentially overcome some of those. But of course, how do you start to integrate robotics into your construction execution planning when, for the longest time, the construction industry really hasn't had a real stake at the technology table. And then if you look at supply chain, obviously tariffs, that is completely out of the control of most of the construction industry. And obviously subcontractor availability is driven by the challenges with workforce. that we mentioned beforehand. So I think those two things, we see and hear a lot in correspondence and dialogue with our customers, what they're looking to try and solve for in terms of problems. Some of the other areas are a little bit more within the domain. So project complexity is very often driven by owner demands, but that's an area where the industry can respond. And obviously availability of capital is more of a macro issue. And we've certainly seen challenges over the course of the past 10 years since the global financial crisis of availability of capital and the impact that is having on subcontractors' ability to leverage, to borrow, to bond. And again, that's a significant macro issue that people are struggling with. And then again, I mean, societal and governance and climate change, I left those two to the end, but super difficult for construction companies to manage here. Clearly, climate change is beyond the realm of any one country or one industry. And within the United States and elsewhere in the world, an increasing requirement for equal opportunities, local hiring, and a hyper focus on the avoidance of fraud, which unfortunately still remains a characteristic of the industry in certain cases. So, these risk areas I think are super challenging for the construction industry, and I don't think there's any one area there where anyone stands out as being particularly problematic. And I don't know if anybody else on the panel has a particularly strong opinion on this, but these are just the ones that jumped out from some of the industry publications as being significant issues that the construction industry has to respond to.
Andrew, how does this kind of differ from your experience, or are there any that jump out to you as you've been kind of project managing over the last few years?
Yeah, and everything that Guy brought up is absolutely correct for an industry as a whole. And I would say for my direct involvement so far on the project level, the biggest risk that we have is really just ensuring that the right information gets to the right people at the right time. And as projects become accelerated, as these designs become more complex, distilling that information down to the intended reader is increasingly more challenging. And certainly to the the labor component, we see it every single day where the people that are coming to work, how are we going to instill and bring in the next generation, and then more importantly, the individuals that are able to show up, how can we make them as efficient as possible, whether it's in their actual day-to-day or being able to better dispatch them to the job site where their true skill and craft is needed to help advance that building system.
Yeah, and you brought up some really great points, and actually one thing I did want to address here is that how technology is having an impact is, if you just look at historically, a lot of risk, we've approached it as more of a reactive measure. With some of the tools today, such as Pipe, Rhumbix, Hollow Builder, we're able to be much more proactive in regards to a large amount of these different sectors that we're looking at here today, which is really helping us understand a new level of impact we're able to have on the outcome of projects, which has been new and exciting, and something we'll talk about later on as well is truly having that plan and an awareness of these different factors is going to help you succeed in addressing them on your projects just moving forward. So it's great to just have an understanding and where you can be impacting these different aspects of a project.
Great. Moving on, we've got a case study here. This comes to us from Andrew. So Andrew, I'll let you talk to this, but they're working on a naval facility engineering command project, and risk became a very real issue for the project. Andrew, you want to tell us a little bit more about this project?
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone on the call, Hensel Phelps, we were successful in a hard bid contract to complete a new facility, ground up, that was being managed by NAVFAC. The client was a confidential end user, but through the hard bid documents, it was very clear that multiple stakeholders were going to be involved in the final occupancy of the building, meaning that it wasn't just one end user. In some rooms and some program spaces, we had to build it out and coordinate with 3 to 5 different entities. So when we first got started, it was in a different location than we normally operate in. and a lot of the subcontractors that submitted proposals for us, this was their first time really working on a government or NAVFAC type project. So it was very clear that a lot of staff effort and I guess liaison was needed to ensure that they had the right information. As we started going through the submittal process, it became very apparent to all stakeholders that the program requirements were not fully coordinated. So in certain rooms and certain systems, we had 3 different project specifications that we needed to coordinate in addition to the architectural, security, and structural drawings. So this really put a huge burden on the staff and the subcontracting team to really wade through and again distill down what we needed to do at each door opening, each room, and each subdivision. To make matters worse, as the designers were kind of coming to the table and as the project team was correctly identifying conflicts, the owner and the stakeholders were then able to step in and provide some more kind of user feedback. Actually, I want this here versus that there. And again, as the sub-community wasn't really used to working with NAVFAC, the process for submitting RFIs, the process for submitting change orders and documenting everything just became a little more cumbersome. And then finally, as the stakeholders came in and started activating the space, the level of as-builting was slightly inconsistent based on what each stakeholder group needed. The NAVFAC standard was met for the project, but certain stakeholders needed additional information. Fortunately, the project team was able to take in-wall close-in pictures. However, the way they were managed was in a traditional file on a desktop server where you would have to click through multiple subfolders to get to the picture you needed, which kind of bogged down the process and didn't make for as consistent or cohesive a handoff as Hensel Phelps and the stakeholders would prefer.
Great. First, we'll move on to our focus area and we'll talk about project quality. So we'll dive in first with Hensel Phelps. HoloBuilder. So Christian, I'll pass it to you.
Awesome, thank you. So HoloBuilder is a very visual product. So here you can see a quick video. HoloBuilder documents progress in 360-degree to understand what the current conditions are on the job site and also how they changed. You're able to compare this with a model to significantly reduce quality risk and project execution risk for the GC. So if you have a visitor that doesn't necessarily put work in place, this is a great way for the visitor to see the site remotely rather than needing to go there. And the fewer people you have in the field, the better. Of course, a real job walk in the real field is never replaceable, but there are many situations our customers have found to be able to remotely see the site and then save that walk or drive or flight out there and don't expose yourself to unnecessary risk. That's one of the ways of using this data that is collected in the field. Jeremy Humphreys from Barton Mallow shared another really interesting way. Once you document the job site over time, ongoingly in 360-degree, it's a little bit like a Google Street View that allows you to see how changes were made over time. And looking back once the project is complete, it's a little bit like a knowledge base that has been created that you can walk someone through really easily and say, this is how we built this specific facility. In this case, it's a hospital and a specific X-ray machine room that is very difficult to build and has specifications that need to be communicated. Jeremy Humphreys uses this in order to communicate to the younger generations of the workflows how decisions were made and how specific types of construction are being built, and therefore mitigating the risk of losing that knowledge as the experienced workforce leaves the industry. That's kind of one of the advantages of having a thorough job site documentation, even after the job is complete.
And then finally, how are people using HoloBuilder devices to help mitigate safety risk?
Given that the 360 element really shows you how it what maybe a driver of an excavator sees the world. This example here, done by Skanska, actually shows how the person driving the excavator thinks they're alone, but when actually walking around it, you see that there are dozens of people around. You just can't see them from the inside. So using it for training people that would then end up going into the field, how many dead angles are around the excavator is a very powerful way, using and making use of the spherical shape and the geometry of that documentation to communicate how it will look like. You can even put this in virtual reality if you want, or just look at it in the browser on the phone to share with the rest of the team. If I got this right, this team specifically actually used this in the weekly safety meetings to have everyone experience this, because there's, I think, about 10 people or so around this excavator, and from the inside, as you can see here, it really looks like there's nobody around there. So very, very powerful way to communicate what reality looks like, and with a very scalable way of sharing that.
Satyam, do you have anything to add around quality or safety in terms of kind of how Pipe is helping to impact that?
Yeah, definitely. And so when it comes to mitigating risk, it really does start in the pre-construction phase and understanding what's coming through in your contract documents. When you look at construction litigation, almost 70% of cases do involve, in a very large part, what the submittal process look like. And when you have teams who are manually analyzing documents just based on the concept of human error, there is a pretty high chance that the critical requirements are being either overlooked or being pushed off due to a time crunch. By being able to leverage systems such as Pipe Auto Specs, not only are you beginning to structure data in a way that is much more manageable, but you're able to identify and mitigate risks beginning from day one. You're able to understand what are those important tests and inspections that need to be performed, and you can actually put together a strong quality assurance as well as quality compliance plan. And by doing so, you really are, going back to my earlier point, being proactive about not only understanding the risk that may be involved with this project, but also being able to have the time and the data and insight necessary to put a plan together on how you're going to address that with all the multiple stakeholders involved. And many times it's a piece that gets overlooked. It's definitely not the most glamorous aspect when it comes to reviewing submittal logs, but it is one that can have a major impact on the success of a project, especially when it comes to mitigating the risk that is involved when it comes to not only quality, but also the level of deliverables that you're actually providing. Being able to have an open line of communication based on contract data is something that's going to allow you to, once again, put together a strong, proactive plan of action in order to mitigate risk across multiple different levels. And as I said, this really does start in the pre-construction phase, where you're putting together your plan of action, and it progresses and it's developed throughout the duration of the project. But by having that understanding on day one, you're able to mitigate simple aspects that have a major impact on a job. The most basic example is rework. That's just a cost that comes with not understanding what is going to be involved with the project, or understanding the full scope of that. By having a clear scope of work defined, you're able to perform work right the first time, and you're not losing time, money, resources, having to go back and do that again.
Great, thanks. Moving on to our next focus area, which is performance risk. Guy, so why is field data important in a company's risk mitigation efforts?
Yeah, so when you go back and start looking at the way in which risk is managed, it's all about likelihood, severity, and consequences. And you're looking at particular actions or occurrences and trying to work backwards and understand, if these things happen, what is the potential risk, or what is the potential outcomes of this? And really, that is all fed by data. It's a numerical exercise, right? And so if you're able to identify risk, and part of the mitigation measures for these things might be to measure it more frequently, to identify it early, to come up with data-driven strategies for quantification, to try and work out what the best response would be. clearly anything that is qualitative, anything that is quantitative needs to be fed by data. So the extent or the impact of all of these occurrences needs to be fed with reliable information, both in terms of timeliness, which, the longer things go unmanaged can significantly impact severity and consequences, but both in terms of trying to understand what the best response to a particular risk event might be, whether it's a safety or a quality related issue, or even in terms of project level performance, which is, an insurable risk that is out there. And fundamentally, we see this being a real challenge and opportunity in a number of different areas across the industry, and significant overlap with some of the workflows that we've tried to automate. So the time and material product that I'll talk about a little bit later on is hugely impactful for being able to surface financial risk, not only for the subcontractors who are out of pocket for at-risk work, but the general contractors who are managing contingency risk on behalf of their owners. The financial risk for the owners about being exposed to unanticipated costs at the end of the project. Just one small area of our platform that has huge impacts in terms of cost effectiveness and the viability of construction projects and practitioners. You think about field timekeeping, you look at one of the big areas that we alluded to earlier around labor staffing. The construction industry can no longer rely on huge pools of available talent to accelerate projects if they fall behind on schedule. They're just not out there. And so the construction industry has to be way more astute around planning, resourcing, and measuring production and productivity. And a key component of that is accurate, timely field timekeeping data. Furthermore, you look in California, where we're based, you've got this act called PAGA, and you've got meals and breaks rules in California. The issues for California-based contractors for avoiding labor compliance-related issues, labor risk, legal risk, is huge, and so many of the companies that we work with are unable to respond effectively with it with accurate data, because gathering it from the field is really time-consuming. And then going down the list of the things that we offer, typically, daily construction reports is huge for general contractors and owners to manage the legal risk that accrues on projects, understanding, interfaces, weather-related issues, impacts, and claims. And the construction industry has for the longest time been really litigious, but being able to try and reduce the discourse that exists between companies on the back of accurate and timely data to promote best practices in the industry is hugely influential. And so, if we just I just wanted to focus on a few bits and pieces about why we think this is particularly relevant. This is just a little bit of the overview of our platform that I won't go into in too much detail, but there's a certain amount of information here that just gathering this data in a timely way, understanding when people started and ended their time card. That labor risk issue that I alluded to, in California, you have to document when people started their time, when they started their shift, when they took their first break, when they finished their first break, when they took their meals, and overall how many hours they worked. And that's really, really challenging for a construction company to gather on pieces of paper and to get the craft workers to sign off on every single day. So clean, crisp, simple interfaces that allow people to gather the data at the right level of detail, to allow the craft workers to sign off on it every single day. It's just a very basic level of risk mitigation by creating a simple, clean interface that it's all driven off the back of field entered data. Mobile daily reporting, again, how often have has anyone on the call walked into a project trailer and seen a massive stack of DCRs sitting there that someone has to go through? And then you hear about the only time that these things actually get leveraged is in the event of a claim, when a lawyer is having to sift through thousands of DCRs to understand what happened. And of course, in that instance, the only people that really benefit from it are the lawyers. The data that's embedded in these things in terms of delays and impacts and restrictions and safety and production, performance measurements, and being able to share all of that data. Going back to what Andrew alluded to, from the NAVFAC project around access to timely data is huge. And so we just see technology and integrated technologies like Rhumbix and HoloBuilder in particular, where the visual element and the data element comes together, being super influential in terms of being able to drive this. And then finally, where we see, you're starting to see some real opportunity around performance risk. being a new product or a relatively new product where owners are ensuring the performance of their projects to cover any late delivery. Lending institutions and financial agencies that are looking to finance P3 type projects are taking out coverage to cover delays and impacts on their projects that in very much is out of their control. How can you create an ecosystem where all of the stakeholders are sensitive to issues that drive production and productivity, and they can potentially mitigate the cost of this cover and make these projects a little bit more predictable? And at the end of the day, gathering data, leveraging emerging technologies for data automation, AI, machine learning, advanced analytics and visualizations, cloud-hosted representations of data, data lakes, all these sorts of things converge to create incredibly powerful ecosystems to solve the same fundamental questions that the construction industry has been struggling with for years, which is, did we have enough people on the job site to do what we wanted to do? Are we getting as much in the ground as we need to? And are we going to hit these things on time? Those really simple questions. And then, of course, are we doing this in a way which is safe? And are we doing this at a certain level of specification and quality that HoloBuilder and Pipe hit on so much? So, there's just a few bits and pieces there. And the last one I want to touch on, which is something that's really, that I'm really passionate about, and I think Andrew will, maybe talk a little bit more about this, is around the time and material tracking process that, the construction industry has for such a long time relied on paper-based processes for really everything. And the time and material process documents out-of-scope work that is directed by the owner, directed by the GC for acceleration, for impact mitigation, scope changes, whatever that may be. And the subcontracting community and the GC in many cases often do that work at risk. And it drives so many of the latent behaviors in the construction industry that are unfavorable. And financial risk, payment risk, bonding, performance, the risk that companies can even stay in operation, it is hugely impacted by, the opportunity for subcontractors to get timely recovery, and obviously for the GCs to manage contingency, for owners to manage the cost impact of their projects. And so this little bit of the platform that is a relatively recent addition to Rhumbix, but is getting some really good input and feedback, is all about being able to connect those field personnel, frontline foremen on the subcontractor side or the GC side, generating tickets, pushing that data into the project management ecosystem to generate reliable insights on cost, the genesis of the work, why it was performed, get that in front of the owners and give absolutely everybody transparency and visibility that this work was A, performed, is B, hanging out there, C, needs to be compensated, and D, needs to be accounted for. And the more that the industry can respond to that, I think the likelihood that you'll see issues of subcontractor non-payment, lack of recovery, issues of subcontractor default, poor capital performance, low return on capital expenditure that are so characteristic of the industry, be sufficiently, significantly diminished. So yeah, just a few bits and pieces. And I think this really goes back to what Andrew was talking about around the connectedness of data and getting the right information to the right people at the right time, that I think is a pretty common thread around, this presentation in general. Like, using data to better manage risk is a really profound strategy that cuts across all of the construction management risk areas that we sort of highlighted at the beginning.
And then our final focus area is industry response. So Guy, back to you to talk to us a little bit about Aon and reinsurance and kind of technology and what that means for the broader industry.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously when you talk about risk, people's minds are going to be immediately drawn to things like workers' compensation insurance and general liability and all risk insurance packages. And, the construction insurance market is as competitive as anything. And so you're seeing, construction insurance providers, brokers, reinsurance companies really understanding the value of connected data solutions to help mitigate risk. And if you think about what the nature of insurance is, it's all about actuarial studies of the likelihood and the consequences of actions that they are insuring. And at the end of the day, the construction industry, the insurance industry has been very much reactive, looking over its shoulder at the data that's generated but that is all lagging indicators. And so the construction, the insurance brokers and the insurance providers look at technology companies as a really powerful opportunity to differentiate, to bring additional value to their customers, whether it's through OSIPs, CSIPs, or other insurance packages by partnering with technology companies. But more importantly, they recognize that if the use of these technologies generates data that helps to mitigate risk and helps to understand that the risk profiles for the packages or the products that they're selling are lower, they can be sold at a lower rate. And you look at a $1 billion project in New York City that has maybe an 8% characteristic or component for workers' compensation. That's $80 million that might be attributed to just covering workers' comp risk on that project. And if technology that exists, and we haven't spoken too much about safety, but obviously HoloBuilder has a huge component to play with that, as does Rhumbix to some extent. And obviously, Pipe in terms of understanding specifications, being able to understand the spec risks of how this thing is going to be built goes a long way to constructability and timely execution in a safe manner. All of these things come together in a way that substantially reduces the risk, empowered by timely access to data. And I think when you see a really influential name like Aon, recognizing the opportunity to share technology with its customers and highlight how these technology vendors can change the nature of the insurance industry and change the risk profile away from like a really antiquated EMR rate to something which is way more proactive. I think that's a really profound statement of intent that the industry needs to be attentive to. So Aon's phenomenal in terms of like the research that it does. If anyone wants to go and look at Aon's construction offering and read some of the reports that are out there, strongly recommend, because they highlight the emerging areas of risk. They talk really coherently about data and the opportunity to resolve this. I think they're very forward thinking in the way they're looking to take the industry. So
yeah, absolutely. And one of the important things this highlights, especially with Aon doing analysis and diving deep into all of the different construction technology startups that are out there that help mitigate risk. When you go through this overview, you realize how many players are actually out there that all want to help mitigate that risk. And when we kind of want to answer the overall question of how do we mitigate risk in 2020, one of the best ways is engaging in that process by partnering with some of those players out there. That has benefits from both sides. From a GC or contractor standpoint, it's very beneficial to be able to mold your technology around your needs. All of the companies, Pipe, Rhumbix, HoloBuilder, and many of the others that are out there, they're safe side, focusing specifically on safety. There are amazing companies out there, and all of us are very keen on molding our technology around customer-specific needs. So one of the things that we pride ourselves with, specifically at HoloBuilder, is that we don't ever build anything that only is vetted by us. Everything comes out of the customer feedback, and if it's not endorsed by a customer, we will not build it. So partnering with a GC from our side is super beneficial. It helps us build product. For instance, with Andrew and Hensel Phelps, we've been partnering now for, Andrew, how long has it been? Since 2016?
Yeah, November of 2016.
November in 2016, and much of what we shared today actually didn't exist back then. So it was Andrew taking a leap and saying, well, this is a team that can build good technology, and I have a bunch of ideas of what problems they could solve for us here at Andrew's project specifically, and we've been co-developing features since then. And you could not count this on two hands anymore, the amount of features that we built together. So I guess when thinking about mitigating risk moving forward, partnering with some of those startups and companies that are out there that help mitigate risk is a wonderful way forward. And I think 2020 is, the technology is at a level where it's so advanced that it's a great year to do that.
Satyam, do you have anything to add before we move on?
I think Christian really just hit exactly the points that I find very important. We stress every day, not only internally to our teams, but the partners that we work with, that the feedback loop is so important. It's how we're able to provide, more innovative workflows and solutions, and it's only going to happen by working together. And as Christian mentioned earlier, it's great to see, collaboration with companies like ours, but there's plenty of organizations and groups out there that I encourage, the attendees today and all of us to get more involved in, because the more conversations that we can have around these different aspects that can have a major impact on the deliverability of our projects is only going to help us move further as an industry. So, once again, I appreciate the points that both Guy and Christian and Andrew have brought up. So, and I think we're headed on the right track. So 2020 is poised to be a great year.
Great, and then we'll close out with a case study or project highlight on the SFO T1C project. So Andrew, a couple of questions around that. So you work on one of the largest projects currently being built in the San Francisco Bay Area that also happens to be next to an active airport. What specific challenges do you face there that other possibly smaller projects can learn from the way you think about risk?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, aside from the incredibly dynamic site constraints, again, I would say for the callers, joining us on the webinar, the main takeaways that we have are really in information. And even if a project is small, if it's big, if it's fast, if it's slow, the amount and the quality of information is, always, a huge focus for the stakeholders. So at SFO, we had the pleasure of, using and being able to work with all three of these technology providers. And what I would encourage, everyone to do is, really reach out, early on is, obviously is preferable, but understand what the end user is looking for. Talk to the foreman, talk to the superintendents, talk to the stakeholders, and try to understand how that information needs to be consumed at that specific level. And through Rhumbix, we're using them for both our labor and production tracking and our timekeeping. So for any additional work that we have to do to advance the schedule, again, while we're negotiating and reviewing the design with the stakeholders, we're able to provide very deep and accurate visibility into any change condition. Furthermore, Rhumbix is also enabling our team doing production work to better monitor all of our actual cost codes, which enables the project team to provide timely and accurate real-world decisions. Through HoloBuilder, our team was able to get the benefits of having time travel, where we can go and harvest these photospheres, log them, and organize them on our plan views. So if we ever have a changed condition, if we ever have a dispute on schedule, or if the owner just simply wants to understand what has already been built in order to better inform their stakeholders as to what decisions can still be made, they're able to jump in, easily navigate the software environment, and what we've always called it is the single source of truth. It's no longer my documentation versus someone else's. It's a shared open pool of 360-degree imagery that's able to best reflect the condition of the project through different slices in time. And finally, with Pipe, especially with a project this large, being able to offload a lot of redundant process and procedure from the staff is huge. Even though all of our field engineers, office engineers are salaried employees, it's still important that we enable the human and the engineer to review the critical information and not bog them down as much with the minutia and the monotonous task of harvesting or collecting the information. And one big thing that we touched on earlier for risk management is, again, not just identifying it, but how do you work to prevent it or best manage it? And so for us, all three of these software platforms have done a phenomenal job in order to provide better engineered controls to, again, allow the information to get structured and then allow and enable the team to make the best decision possible without displacing, schedule, quality, or any safety considerations.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. And that concludes the bulk of our webinar presentation today. So let me jump out of this real quick and see what questions we have.
While you look for the questions, Kyla, maybe I just adding to the case study that Andrew just went through. There's actually a entire talk about how 360-degree reality capture moves the needle on a $1.2 billion construction project, and that is referring to the Harvey Milk Terminal 1 project at AU. So if anyone is interested, make sure you look for Andrew's name on the AU schedule and to learn more about that.
Okay, great. So first question, do the three software solutions integrate into one another? Christian, you want to take that?
The answer is not yet. Again, everything we do is customer driven. So if anyone on this panel that is listening to this is interested to integrate and have Rhumbix, Pipe, and HoloBuilder integrate, please let us know. And if you could be our, let's say, champion for that integration, we will then start building out the integration. Everything is possible. It just takes a champion and a good idea of where the logical integration points are. We have a strong belief that no integration should be just for pure marketing purposes. Everything has to enable workflows. Everything has to enable value for the end user in the field, as Andrew mentioned. When we are able to come up with one of those workflows through your input, then we can build that out, and I would love that, to be honest.
Yeah, just on that note, Rhumbix is not integrated with Pipe or HoloBuilder right now. We see a very logical point of integration with HoloBuilder in particular, in terms of our ability to embed 360-degree photos in some of the reporting that we generate, whether that is just the 360-degree image or actual links back to HoloBuilder to provide references through that additional context. What we've seen and heard about extensively with the data that we generate is people love the ability to dig into the issues that are surfaced to our platform and to run them to ground. And if a 360-degree photo is associated or labeled to an issue that is associated with a delay or an impact or a QA/QC issue, reported out in the field on a formal document like a DCR, the opportunity to then surface that link and run that, chase that little paper trail back through into HoloBuilder to understand the wider context of it within a visual representation is incredibly powerful. So, we see a lot of that with advanced solutions for tracking weather at the local level, for really understanding sentiment analysis using AI for the data, and AI machine learning with the data that we capture to look at trends that are reported through our system. But HoloBuilder and being able to derive real data from 360-degree photos that are labeled is hugely powerful. We'll 100% get there, but as Christian alluded to, a lot of this is market driven and understanding how both customers from the GC owner and subcontractor side might choose to change the paradigm, and in many cases because general contractors mandate the requirements for daily reporting within sort of traditionally generally contracted projects. We would look for forward-thinking general contractors to sort of think outside the box and maybe change the paradigm here. And we're seeing some do that, some owners that are particularly sophisticated, but in many cases, I think it's still to emerge to really leverage the opportunity of these connected software solutions.
Okay. Yeah. Question to you, Satyam. How accurate is Pipe auto specs?
Yeah, of course, great question. I mean, we have a patented machine learning, computer vision based algorithm We've analyzed well over 2 million documents to date, coming directly from our clients, such as Mortensen, Skanska, Turner. We're about 99.9999%. If you put that into actual numbers, there's a potential to miss maybe 1 out of every 100,000 submittals or so.
Okay. And then, Guy, question to you. Where do you see the future of field data evolving as it pertains to risk management, and what current barriers to adoption are out there?
Yeah, no, super question. I think that there is a real opportunity to expand field data capture and the analytics in emerging areas of risk. I think there are significant opportunities to help try and control legal risk. I think there are really good opportunities to help surface insights that help people manage emerging challenges with labor, and to create more of awareness and an understanding within the industry around how labor impacts production and productivity. I'm from the UK, if you couldn't tell from the accent, and in the UK, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, quantity surveying is sort of the paradigm there, and it's much more focused on production and resourcing and managing the underlying units that drive production on projects. In my experience in the US, at least, particularly on the GC side, it tends to be a lot more focused with sort of schedule and cost, and driven by some of these other control techniques. And that's all well and good until you find you don't have the resources on the job site because of significant labor constraints. And so I think emerging opportunities that recognize that risk, that macro risk across the industry, and the way in which general contractors and subcontractors will respond to that to better manage that through more advanced approaches to production, performance measurement, reporting, and in an integrated way, I think will be hugely powerful. And then the other part of it, I guess I'd love Andrew's perspective on this as well, because he works on a big infrastructure project. There's a real financial crunch, but there's a huge amount of money out there that's looking to invest. And so P3 projects are going to be a huge characteristic of how infrastructure is built in the US. But there's a huge issue around risk there that, the people that are looking at investing in projects, whether it's P3 or looking in other sorts of approaches to project finance, want to be able to understand the risk profiles of these projects. But in many cases, they don't have the historical data to be able to predict whether this project that we might finance is low risk or high risk. And so how can the industry respond to that to be able to change, or at least more effectively measure project outcomes to potentially free up capital, so that we can build more of the stuff that we build really, really well? I think that is a huge characteristic of the industry that super switched on GCs will be able to respond to. But that really requires a collaborative partnering approach across all the stakeholders. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that? I feel like I may have thrown you in at the deep end there, but would love your thoughts if that resonates.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a evolving market, and depending on the project, the pro formas either do or do not calc out. For us, as a true general contractor, labor is probably one of the highest risks that we see day to day on the job site. And through timely information in a standardized cost code system, we're able to better educate not only ourselves, but just kind of like our key trade partners as to what metrics to look out for. We'll track the labor coding. So if we have to go do another aviation project in Nashville, again, we know relatively what hours per widget everything should take. And then there's obviously some modifier rates that we can use to translate that production value from aviation to healthcare, from healthcare to mission critical to hospitality. So it does help to kind of level it, and it also enables the team, again, to not have to your point, relearn everything, because you are consistently verifying and supporting that baseline metric.
Great. And then last question to you, Christian. How does image capture in the field work?
Oh, great question. Actually, maybe Andrew, I will also ask you to jump in there. So everything is documented on floor plans. And we use 360-degree cameras. You can buy them on Amazon. They're very, very affordable, between $300 and $400. And you can have multiple people in the field walk around and document on the floor plan. The classic way of doing it is you locate yourself on the floor plan and then take an image. The new way of doing it, we just released speed mode, which uses AR from your phone to locate yourself on the job site. And then all you do is walk the site, and once you come close to one of the points of interest, the spots that you want to capture, it auto triggers the capture, and then adds to it to this time travel that Andrew mentioned. Andrew, given that you have worked with a whole team of field engineers working on a capture schedule and capture plan, how did you do it, and what did you find most valuable?
Yeah, the biggest thing for us was, getting everyone together, all of our field engineers, and really laying out the expectation. So we didn't constrain it to a particular day, but we did ask and request that, each of their zones were kind of harvested at least once a week. And again, through the collaborative nature of HoloBuilder software, the field engineers could go out, any which day they chose, to harvest their pictures without interrupting the workflow for the overall system. And again, to be able to go out, use the 360-degree camera, simply tap on the location on the plan, and have that backend link everything together, instantly sped it up. So once the field engineers saw how easy it was to use and how easy it was to, again, go reference, that workflow and UI really helped to reinforce and maintain the process, again, because it was so simple.
And one of the features that we have co-developed after you all started, actually, at the Harvey Milk Terminal 1 project, is Job Walk Planner that allows you to pre-plan before the job even starts the locations that you want your team to capture later on, and then actually send notifications from the Job Walk Planner straight to the field engineer that would then go and capture the specific locations. That's a new feature that we kind of co-developed. A little too late for Andrew, your project, sorry, but now it's there.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. If you want to get in touch with any of our panelists, here is their contact information. As always, you can visit any of their websites to learn more. But to get in contact with any of the panelists, please use this information. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending the slides and a recording of this presentation. So thanks again for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting, Kyla.